Hi all, thank you for joining us today for our webinar with Global Guardian. I'm Jake Pasecki, Director of Business Development here at Conway Wealth Group, and I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items before turning it over to Michael Conway to kick off our event with Dale Buckner of Global Guardian. Thank you to those of you who have submitted your questions with your registration. They will be answered throughout today's discussion. We'll also be accepting questions throughout the presentation that will be answered at the end of our briefing. The audience is muted, so in order to submit a question, please type it into the question dropdown within the GoToWebinar navigation panel, and it will be received and asked accordingly, if not already answered during the course of the webinar. The thoughts and opinions expressed today by Global Guardian do not necessarily reflect those of Conway Wealth Group. Global Guardian is a privately owned company which is not affiliated with the Conway Wealth Group or Summit Financial LLC and affiliates. The information and opinions discussed today may not have been verified by us, nor do we make any representations as to their accuracy and completeness. So with that being said, I turn it over to Michael Conway to kick off our event.
Okay, good deal. Thank you, Jake. Hey, everybody. I am Michael Conway, founder and CEO of Conway Wealth Group. Thanks, everybody, for attending and joining us for this special webinar with our Life and Wealth Network member, Global Guardian. So today, we're excited to present to you Global Guardian CEO and 24-year U.S. Army veteran, Colonel Dale Buckner, for a briefing and discussion on overall national security. We all just witnessed one of the most polarizing elections in our history, and the country continues to feel incredibly divided, all as we try to cope with the ongoing effects of COVID and the overall pandemic. With so much unrest and uncertainty, we're looking forward to Global Guardian sharing their perspectives today in our discussion. And with that, I'd like to throw it over to our Managing Director, Zach Conway, to continue with comments. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. As many of you know, Conway Wealth Group focuses on this idea of aligning life and wealth. So for our clients, we spend a lot of time quantifying not just investment gains in portfolios, but gains in the parts of life that we think create lasting happiness for families. And we do this by having important conversations and ensuring each client family has access to the right professionals along the way. That's why we created the Life and Wealth Network, which consists of what we feel are the nation's best and brightest service providers in these different areas of life. As Mike said, with so much uncertainty right now, thanks to the pandemic and our political divides, a lot of families have wondered about what it all means. So what security issues should we be aware of at the national level? And how should families be thinking about our own safety and security? And that's why we're proud to have a fantastic organization like Global Guardian as a member of the network to provide answers and solutions related to personal security of our families. And we hope you can all gain some valuable information and insights through today's discussion. So just before turning it over to Dale, some quick background. Dale Buckner, as we said, is the president of Global Guardian in Arlington, Virginia, and has been leading the firm since its founding in March 2012, directly responsible for day-to-day operations and the growth of the firm. Dale is a decorated combat commander with multiple combat tours and classified operations in Iraq, Afghanistan, Colombia, Haiti, and Cuba, as well as executed deployments to Russia, El Salvador, Honduras, Chile, Panama, Kuwait, and Qatar. Dale served the United States Army Infantry for 9 years, military intelligence for 2 years, and Special Forces Green Berets for 13 years. He commanded 5 organizations, including an infantry reconnaissance platoon, Special Forces scuba team, Special Forces counterterrorism team, a Special Forces counterterrorism task force, and a Special Troops battalion. Dale has bachelor's degrees in criminal justice and business, master's degrees in public administration and business administration, a master's certificate in strategic leadership from Cornell, and he was a senior fellow at the Tufts University School of Law and Diplomacy. Dale earned a total of 27 awards and decorations, highlighted by his Combat Bronze Star Medal and Defense Meritorious Service Medal. Dale, welcome. Thank you for joining us. and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Zach, Mike, Jake. I appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. As stated, we're going to look at the world a little bit, and we're going to look at ourselves a little bit as we go through this. As described, I was in the military. I've now been in corporate America for going on a decade. I think the key to this briefing today for all of you is I will not be briefing from a political lens. This is easy for me to do. As being an officer, you're not authorized for a majority of my adult life to talk about what party you support, who you voted for, so on and so forth. And I think this is part of the conversation today. Knowing how divided we are, there'll be some things I say today that you might not like, and I'm hoping that we can simply have a mature adult discussion about it. I'm not briefing you from any religious point of view. I'm not briefing you as a Catholic, Protestant, Jew, or anything else. When I talk about the world, that's an important factor. Of note, I have lived and operated in over 70 countries in the world, and I do have what I classify as a non-US centric view of the world, if you will. And lastly, a lot of this opinion that I have, if you will, is purely based on being a former executive of US policy. Good and bad comes with that, but I wanted to point that out. Lastly, on my admin side, I'll try and hit the wave tops. I've got about 6-7 topics here I'd like to get through within 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll hold the rest for all active live question and answer, as I find that the Q&A is typically better than PowerPointing you to death, and the questions we get from the answer kind of give the briefing life, if you will. So I'm going to dive in here. You can see what to expect from the webinar. I'm going to start with the global platform, starting in the Middle East. Then I'm going to talk about some unrest. I'm going to highlight some terrorism that we've seen in the last 60 days in Europe and what that looks like moving forward. And then I'm going to focus in on the US. What's going on in the US, terrorism in the US, travel considerations in cyber. And then we'll go into Q&A. So obviously, all of you are feeling this. I'm living it with you. I don't think this is unique to anyone at this point. We've all been at this now going on 10 months. And there is light. And as I put in that little gray box in the top right, I do feel like we are starting to see some good things happening here at the latter part of the year as we close out. And I do think that we will have positive outcomes and positive shifts at a global scale, let alone the US, by about the end of the second or beginning of the third quarter. My only note here is, and I'm based in DC, and I have a lot of connections into the State Department, the FBI, CIA, and so on and so forth. All my brothers at DoD that are overall in charge of the vaccination distribution for this country are very optimistic. They feel very good about it. I will say that. That being said, this will be harder to distribute around the country, let alone the world, than we think, and it won't be instant. So I kind of pause it. It's great news, and we should all be very happy we're seeing these fantastic reports about the vaccination. At the same time, this is going to take time, and getting to rural parts of the US, let alone parts of Africa and Central South America, distribution will not be instant. So I caution that that we all feel that by May or June of next year, everything's 100% back to normal. It's just not going to be. Second point, you're seeing obviously a lot of damage in the global economy, to include the US. We have seen crime spike abroad and in the US. We'll get into that in the briefing. Conflicts will return. Things that were going hot and heavy right up until 2019 have gone to ground in many cases. So we'll talk about that throughout the brief. Travel will be slow to return, but it will. And I think it'll take 2 to 3 years to be close to what we were in 19, but it will happen. And then lastly, the big question, and this is probably the most controversial, is can we as Americans unite again around something? And, you know, I'm 52 years old. The country has never been more divided over its race, its sexuality, its politics. It's just a very interesting place to be right now. And again, I'll get into this and kind of what I think is happening and what the future looks like. I am hopeful we can bring down the rhetoric on both sides. I'm hopeful that, you know, just that alone will get us back to somewhat neutral. So we'll get into all these as we go through. but I do think there's light coming very soon. First big topic internationally. This is a good news story. And I don't think a lot of people really understand the magnitude of this. I lived in the Middle East for 3.5 years of my life. It is the most difficult part of the world to understand up front, number one. And as a Westerner, as an American, I left there after almost 4 years of my life there. There are still things that I simply don't think I will ever understand or come to a logical conclusion. And the reason is logic is not part of that equation in many parts of that region. But this was a good news story. If you caught it, great. If you didn't, I just want to highlight it, and then you can do your own research. As you look at the map here on the right-hand side, relations normalizing with Israel, you can see Egypt and Jordan had been long-standing. The Sudan was opted in this year. Bahrain opted in this year. The UAE opted in this year. And if you look closely, you see the little diamond formation next to Saudi Arabia and Oman. Netanyahu's talking about flying to Oman in the next month or so. So this was an incredibly positive outcome. We should give the administration credit. We should give the State Department credit. I don't think, frankly, and I have a team of analysts, we were briefing, I get updates every Monday afternoon. We were skeptical at Global Guardian. Our analysts, this was kind of like, oh, it's just another administration attempting to create peace in the Middle East. It's impossible. It's not going to happen on their watch. It's not going to happen in our lifetime. To see this many countries turn towards a normalized relationship with Israel, we thought was really, really positive. Now, the Middle East is tough. You take 3 steps forward, 5 steps back, of course. We've got to see if it holds. But we really did think this was a wonderful, wonderful development as we look around the world. Next, I mentioned this in the opening. In 2019, whether it was terrorism, whether it was the illegal movement of human beings from one country to another, an illegal slave trade, if you will, whether it was drug trade, whether it was the mafia, the cartels, all of those kind of big box news stories, a lot of those things went to ground when COVID started because borders closed, airspace closed, and people started to look very inward. And a lot of that traffic and negative topics, if you will, kind of went to ground. And in 2020, we've seen a lot of things go down. Here in the United States, our crime statistics plummeted for all but car larceny and murder. Other than that, everything else has gone to ground. What we are predicting, and we're already seeing the fringes of, is once we get, to probably second quarter of 2021, all of these issues are going to start to really come back very quickly in a robust manner. And I'll kind of walk you through what that looks like. So as you look here at the global unrest slide, the main stories of 19, Hong Kong, as you were all witnessing, had enormous amounts of protest, civil unrest. Obviously, the independence of Hong Kong, the beginning of China, the mainland, starting to take over Hong Kong was very apparent. We think actually under the guise of COVID, the Chinese mainland government has actually come in and very quietly set conditions to take over and really erode the independence of Hong Kong over the next 5 to 10 years. So we think that's really going to take hold, and you'll see it quicker and quicker and quicker as time goes by. Chile, the Constitution is under pressure to be rewritten. If you're a historian, you understand the Pinochet decade, if you will, in the forming of Chile. There was lots of pros. It's a very organized country, the most robust economy outside of Brazil in South America. But the negative side was very controlling, very heavy-handed, if you will. And the people with the economic downturn, protests in the street, dissatisfaction with how the Constitution is written, and I think you're going to see that come roaring back. Overall, globally, you're seeing, very high youth unemployment, creating lack of opportunity. Therefore, military-age men seem to do a lot of damage around the world, and that has not gone away. Mexico, right in our hemisphere. This is what I've been briefing this now for about 5 years. We are on the precipice of losing Mexico to the point where Mexico is a narco state forever. And the reason is this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. There's just too much money in the system. And we, the United States, unfortunately consume more drugs and have more problems with illegal drugs than any country in the world. And it's because we can afford it. And we've got an open country. That being said, Mexico, with that amount of money in the system, every police chief, every politician, anybody of good standing, it seems, at some point gets corrupted because of the power of the cartels. So we're very, very skeptical that we're going to get Mexico back on the right path. And the reason is money and greed. And it's just too much is available. It's too tempting and it's too corrosive. And then lastly, coming back into 2020, you'll see here Nigeria was having enormous amounts of protest in its country. There were hit squads and a lot of abuses by the controlling powers in Nigeria, and that's going to come back. And it's starting to tip right now. Obviously, in the U.S., we've had racial injustice, social inequality, the election, COVID shutdowns, people having issue with the shutdowns, all of those things, and of course the economy. And then lastly, in Thailand, the monarchy in Thailand has been basically untouchable for the last 80 to 100 years, and that no one questioned it. And you're now seeing that the ruling monarchy, people in the population, the society of Thailand are starting to rise up and demand change. We think you're going to see a lot of that continue by the halfway through 2021. So all of these things, really the one thing that is in common on all of those things that were main stories in 19 that went to ground that we think are going to roar back is populations being dissatisfied with their government, whether that's the structure or it's their actual leaders. And again, I think we're not unique to this here in the US. You've all witnessed it. Moving to terrorism in Europe, this went to ground. When COVID hit, we have not seen major terrorist attacks in Europe since the first quarter of this year, and then it just seemed to almost disappear. That being said, we do think conditions are being set now, and it's going to return. We're already starting to see this. You can see this slide here on the left in the chart. Starting in 14, you can see arrests, deaths, and attacks all rising to some level. And then coming down by 19, and then obviously 20, it goes nearly flat. We're not done yet. That being said, this is in direct concert with the rise and fall of ISIS, starting in Syria and making its way all the way to the Turkish border and Iraq also. So this was a good news story, frankly. We saw global terrorism come down since 16, precipitously, continuously coming down. And now we, unfortunately, looking forward, we're going to see small level attacks start to come back. And the hope is, and this is where what we're, is TBD here, is do we see a Paris level attack? Do we see the truck running people over in Nice again? Do we see a Brussels level attack with explosives? Although those things are TBD, what we do see as a constant trend is really this. It's impossible to stop someone with a vehicle using it as a weapon. It's impossible to stop someone that is willing to trade their life with a knife to kill people. Now, those are limited attacks, and that's the upside, but it's almost impossible from a law enforcement standard to stop. So the last 60 days, and why you can see the rhetoric on both sides here. We've had 3 civilians killed, 15 injured in Austria just this month. We've had a teacher beheaded last month. We also had 3 people stabbed in the Catholic Church last month in Nice. And you can see the UK and the French governments responded. And that response, which in France was viewed as heavy-handed with the deployment of troops around the country, led to something that I got briefed this a few weeks ago. The former Prime Minister of Malaysia posted, and I quote, "Muslims have the right to be angry and to kill millions of French people for the massacres of the past." That kind of rhetoric on the extreme, combined with the rise of white supremacists and the right-wing extremists across Europe, really sets the continent up, or that, Western Europe, up for a lot of conflict moving forward, unfortunately. So the question is, again, I think much like the United States, can we find cooler heads? Will cooler heads prevail? Can we find a way to bring down the rhetoric? And in this day and age, we'll get into this, it's very difficult with the web, World Wide Web, and all of the things that are being spewed openly in basically the extreme sides of whatever organization you support. Almost done here with slides, and we're doing well on time. We're 22 after the hour. I'm just about finished up here. Stats to the U.S. These are quick hits. I don't think anyone listening would say that we're not a divided country or agree to that. Again, I'm 52 years old. I've never seen the country. I missed the 1968 race riots. I missed that. And in my lifetime, I just have not seen the country divided, and it breaks my heart. And as a former 24-year military professional representing the country and running around the world representing the country, it's really, really disheartening, frankly. That being said, this is America. This is the United States. We always seem to find a way, and I do think we will find our way on positive footing moving forward. As you look at this, you all know these topics. I don't need to regurgitate these to you. The one thing I would highlight is kind of two things at the bottom here. One, I worry about more than anything else. Worrying about what's on cable news and what's online is less important to me or less important to my organization and my intel analysts than this. If parts of our society lose confidence in the social contract that the US government, its primary function is there to support them, to secure them, and to create the conditions, to create wealth, to create stability. If that is lost at scale, I worry about that more than anything else in the United States. And the reason I say that is I've seen it in Haiti, I've seen it in Colombia, I've seen it in the Middle East, I've seen it in Bosnia. There are things that are going on in our society right now that I never thought I would see. And that is a little bit unnerving. That being said, I do think we can find our way back. So we'll get there as I go through here, and happy to answer that when we get into Q&A. As you look at that, the other topic that I don't see a lot of in the news, what was very hot during the summer was this defund the police. And I'm not picking sides here. I would simply say this. I don't think defunding the police actually solves a lot. Do I agree that we, the United States, don't put enough emphasis on mental wellness? I do, and I think that, and I'll ask it almost a rhetorical question: does anybody in this audience want to sign up to be a police officer right now? When I was 20 years old in college, contemplating my future, I contemplated becoming a police officer. It was appealing to me now, and several of my friends and peers did. And they served selflessly and had great careers. I think what we pay our police, I think the way we train our police is terrible. And I'll statistically showcase this for you. Your average soldier, which obviously I'm very familiar with, we spend $900,000 per soldier training, equipping, and preparing them for war every year on average. That's one soldier, almost $1 million a year. And that includes everything from their salary to their equipment to their training. On average, in comparison, to contrast that, we spend about $100,000 or less, depending in the rural, if you're in a rural area, on training, manning, equipping, and preparing our police. But boy, do we ask a lot from our police. They are dealing with the roughest parts of our country, the most broken parts of our country, day in, day out, 24 hours a day, but yet we don't fund them properly. We don't prepare police for what they're going to see out on the street. I just don't believe we do. And I think that topic is almost more important. And if you want to find a way out of this issue of the conflict of what's going on in this country, that is a wonderful start point. And I think this is what's being missed as we have this discussion. I think obviously we're politicizing, the injustice movement, we're politicizing Black Lives Matter, we're politicizing the police, and we're making everyone the boogeyman. And at the end of the day, none of that's going to help solve this problem. This, in my mind, is the most tangible thing we could do as a country, is to retrain our police, to equip them with non-lethal. So if I sent any one of you in the audience out on the street, and I didn't give you proper training, but yet I gave you a gun, and the first time you feel threatened or you get scared, the only option you have is a lethal option. Have I put you out and set the conditions for you to be successful? And the answer is no. And you can apply that to college and classes, you can apply that to business, whatever it is you do in life. The fact that we do not properly train, man, equip, and fund our police, in my mind, is the number one thing we're missing in this conversation. So food for thought as you think through that. Travel, I won't go in too deep in here. I'll summarize two things. Make no mistake, we as a government, and frankly as a world, because there are, the UN has a world tour organization that should be setting the standards for travel on a global scale. After 9/11, all of you experienced this. You saw the development of TSA. We didn't have TSA prior to 9/11. You saw x-ray machines, you saw screening policy. And yes, the bureaucracy took 2 to 3 years to kind of get right. And now in some cases, it's almost gone too far and gotten too big and too bureaucratic. But there was a standard. Here's my point. When COVID hit, the US government nor the global travel organizations of the world created one standard. Right now, to this day, as I brief you, Southwest has a different standard than United. United has a different standard than American. American has a different standard than Delta. That same template applies globally. There was no one standard to address COVID, and that is our number one mistake here. I am hopeful that the Biden administration will recognize this and create this to get us through the next year. Because again, yes, I think we're going to have a vaccine. Yes, by the end of second or third quarter, I think we're going to see positive movement. It doesn't mean it's gone, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't prepare for the next pandemic, because there's another one coming. Think of this as a dress rehearsal for the next pandemic. We need to learn this lesson and never repeat this failure again. There has to be one standard that starts at the federal government and applies all the way down, and then it gets extended globally. Look back at how the US State Department responded when COVID hit. An absolute failure. They left 50,000 Americans. It took over 3 months just to get a majority of them home. Lesson learned is the State Department is not prepared, equipped, or trained to deal with mass scale events on a global basis to take care of Americans. The people in the embassy are there on a diplomatic mission. They are not there with troops and helicopters and vehicles to go and take care of Americans. That's a fallacy. It does not exist. There are 12 Marines tied to every embassy in the world. They're there to protect the grounds of the embassy and the ambassador himself. They're not there to take care of Americans who get stuck because there's an earthquake, a hurricane, a terrorist attack, or a pandemic. And that's a key lesson learned. Lastly, I'll leave you with this. If you can answer the following question, you should travel. Number one, if I come down or my family member gets sick with COVID, how do I get them back to the United States if they're sick and contagious? And where would they go? If you can answer that question, travel. If you get stuck in a country where there's a terrorist attack, an earthquake, a hurricane, a bombing, or they lock down the borders or they lock the airspace because of COVID, how are you going to get home? How do you get out? If you can answer that question, you should travel. If you can't, you should not get on that airplane. It's as simple as that. Last topic, remote working. We've seen a 250% increase in cyber attacks and malware. We've done more cyber responses this year than we have in the last 9 years combined. This has been nonstop. And here's why. All of your workforces were sent home. And yes, you might have a very good cyber and IT platform overlooking your company as an enterprise. What doesn't happen, or what is unknown to this day, and if I ask this question, has anybody ever come into your home and look at where the Wi-Fi goes? Does it go to the apartment above you, to your right, to your left? If you live in a very nice neighborhood, can I sit on your street in a van at 3 o'clock in the morning and can I connect with your Wi-Fi into your home? When's the last time you had the security of your router checked? Do you use public Wi-Fi? Do you walk around with your cell phone on, with your Bluetooth on, your Wi-Fi on, your location tracker on? All of those things are ways into your life. Therefore, we have had massive amounts of remote worker cyber hacking going on, and that's probably not going to go away for quite some time. So I'll pause there. I will say this. Yes, we are going to have some things come roaring back. Yes, we're going to have some very positive things happen in 2021. I'm very hopeful that the vaccine will be distributed and we will start to feel secure by the end of second quarter, beginning of third. But understand, it's got to get out there globally, and we have to get this situation under control globally. And it's going to take a lot of work to get parts of Africa, parts of Central South America, parts of Asia as secure as the Western world. So with that, I'll pause and take questions.
Thank you, Dale. Really appreciate that in-depth briefing. Really great points there. So we've had a few questions come in with some folks' registration, and also some questions that are coming in right now through the GoToWebinar. So if you have any questions, just a reminder, please enter them, and we'll get to them. But the first question centers on evaluating news sources, and the question comes to you, Dale. Is there a place that you look to get unbiased information? We see news outlets that are either very far left leaning or very far right leaning, and they're appealing to their base. So what criteria also do you use when evaluating a news source? I know that's a little bit of a loaded question and a tough question to answer, but we'll pose it to you.
Yep. So yeah, look, I think we all understand that the extremes of the right and left and our news sources, you can find what is going to make you feel good. That's everywhere, and everybody knows that. In order to be apolitical, frankly, with the analysts I have at Global Guardian, we don't look at most open source news platform per se. We look at the FBI crime stats. We look at the CIA fact book. Every single day, we have in real time the OSAC travel monitoring of the globe going on up, where every event in the world is being driven and posted in real time. We look at all the State Department websites. We read academic papers and analysis of events going on. And lastly, we do prescribe, we have multiple what we call open source intel reports that are completely apolitical. They're simply reporting facts. One of those is called Riskline, which I have an enormous amount of trust in. Riskline is the least politicized open source news feed that I can find, and it is just the facts. And it's a mix of, it's based in Europe and in the US. It's got over 250 analysts, and it takes in 230 plus sources, everything from news media to social media, and then their own analysis. So this is a really tough topic. And I would tell you that my summary is, instead of reading certain news sources that are easy, that you find on your cell phone, that come with your Apple phone, we look to government sources that are probably a little bit Western leaning, but certainly are much more apolitical, if you will.
Okay, thank you for that. So the next question is, one would think that countries that support democracies would want to work and band together to attack all the evils that the internet and hacking can support. Could some new world organization be formed, for example, the UN, to work together towards a common goal?
Yeah. So I think that is an incredibly difficult thing to attack. Obviously, since about 1980, I was at the Military Intelligence School of Fort Huachuca for the US military, and a general walked in and said, "We are going to surf the web today." And obviously since the early 90s, this is really a way of life. I don't think that if you do want to respect the freedom of speech, and look, I have colleagues in my own organization, I have colleagues, former colleagues in special forces that I differ with immensely on their political views and view of the world. And the problem we have with trying to censor ourselves online is, yes, do I think there are limits where you can censor things that are clearly just abject falsehoods and lies and conspiracy theory? Yes. But there's also this entire level of information and opinion that's not extreme. It just might not be what you agree with. And I think that's the gray zone where trying to police ourselves, even in the Western world, democracies, trying to be as fact-based as we can online, we should all aspire to, of course. But do I think that we could roll out a global platform to police social media or things on the web? I don't think that's very realistic. I do think that we could form some places you could go to say there's no political spin here whatsoever. This is just verified fact. Could we do something like that? Yes. But should we be trying to judge people's opinions? As you watch Twitter and you watch Facebook, I look at those CEOs being questioned by the Senate, and it's brutal because they're in a no-win position. There's no way Zuckerberg can win that discussion. He's going to find, there's a cohort inevitably that simply he's going to upset. Just like this country right now, no matter what I say, half the country will disagree with what I say, depending where you sit. So this is really hard, is what I would say. And I don't know that we can create that nirvana site that kind of solves this problem instantly. There's no easy button here.
Sure. Thank you for that. So you touched upon this a little bit, Dale, in your presentation regarding the TSA and the way that we traveled in the formation after the events of 9/11. So I'm going to, pivot on this question a little bit and change it. So we've seen security in airports significantly change, and we need some uniform direction on what that security is. So you talked a little bit about travel and the future of travel. Do you see, these mandates going across airlines, kind of in perpetuity? Will this be our new normal in our new way that we travel, much like we have to take our shoes and our belts off now, and that has become a normal way of life?
Yeah, and I mentioned this a little bit. I'll start with, I think we missed this. I think, as a country, as a government, we completely blew this. And this doesn't apply just to the US. Of course, there are international travel standards from the UN and beyond. There are international aviation standards that get implemented every day. And we did not do this as a country, and we did not do it globally. I think that the industry was so afraid to make this difficult and scary that they took the opinion that this will be a small blip. We will get through it with a vaccine. We'll write off 2020 and then we'll rebuild. And the simple fact is we could have had a lot more people feel more secure, and this is all about emotion. If we would have set an international and a domestic standard for you have to get a test within 48 hours, 72 hours to validate before you get on the plane. To implement in the early days of this, back in April, May, there was no standard for masks. People were getting on commercial airliners with no mask, and there was no way, if you're the Delta CEO, how do you implement something when there's no regulation or law being put out by the federal government? You can't, which created fights on airplanes, people being arrested. I mean, it just became a bit of a comedy show. So in our opinion, I think we should right the ship. It's not too late. In our opinion, you've got to create standardizations for the entire international aviation community, and we can still do that. We still have time. And I think, again, that we should view these issues as the dress rehearsal for the next pandemic. And if we can get these policies right now, if we get them right now, we won't face this And you won't have the economic carnage that we've seen. 1 in 10 jobs in the world is tied to the travel industry, and it's increasing. It'll be 2 in 10 by the time we come out of this 2-3 years from now. If we can avoid that in the future, it is worth investing in creating the right policy and the right systems right now. Whether that's health screening, touchless check-in, whether you check your bags out in the parking lot so we don't have people piling in the terminals and standing in line, all of these things could have and should have been addressed, and we missed it. So I do think there's still time, and I am hopeful that someone will grab hold of this here in the next administration and right the ship, and then it'll push itself out globally.
Great, thank you. Along the lines of the pandemic and our country and the freedom that we have in the United States of America, this question is, a lot of people understand the health reasons why we would look towards a shutdown, but being a free country is sort of a double-edged sword. And government mandates really aren't a thing as they are, antithetical to the Constitution. The question is, do you foresee another lockdown in the United States? And how do you feel people might react to it if that is something that is in play?
Yep. So number one, I think as soon as the administration comes in, you will see a federal level response at the highest level of government, and you will not have individual governors out there, much like the travel industry we just talked about, where Delta, Southwest, all those CEOs are making their own policy. You will have a minimal standard that will come out as a plan from the federal government, and it will be imposed on the states. And what I think that will lead to is not a national level lockdown. I don't believe that's going to happen. I don't see that happening. What I do see is where the data suggests you have a hotspot and it is growing out of control, and literally we don't have any beds in our ICU left. There's simply no room in this part of, or this city, or this part of the country, that I think the federal government will come in. I think the military could be activated to move people around and get them to open ICU beds. And I think that in pockets where you've got these inflamed areas, you'll see a heavier response. And I think that's where you're going to see these lockdowns until you see these stats come down to where we believe it's manageable again, and then we'll open things up. So I am hopeful that, number one, we will see a federal level response based on science and facts and data. And I think that you won't see a national level lockdown. You will see lockdowns as required. And I think there'll be a lot more federal intervention. And I said this back in April on a webinar. The one thing that the United States has, the one enterprise the United States has that no one else has at scale that we have, is the US military. It's not the State Department, it's not the CIA, it's not the FBI, it's not the Secret Service. There are thousands of mental health workers in the United States military that we can activate and have been activated, but not at scale. Again, not at the federal level. There are airplanes, there are ambulances, there is medical supply within DOD and the National Guard and the Reserve that we have not utilized. And I think it's the one magic button that we do have, we still haven't pressed. And I think we should absolutely leverage that, the organization of DOD in a much more robust manner than we have.
Fantastic, thank you for that. So in terms of the transition of power in our presidential election here, this question is, what are you seeing on the ground in terms of fringe groups in civil unrest now that the election has been called in favor of Joe Biden?
Yep. I'll start with this. Number one, if you listen to Director Wray of the FBI, and on my staff, I have a gentleman named Mike McGarity. Mike McGarity retired almost 2 years ago, came straight to Global Guardian from FBI. He ran counterterrorism, domestic and abroad, for the FBI. Both Mike and Director Wray of the FBI will tell you their number one concern domestically are far-right fringe groups. The movement and activation and scale and growth of white supremacy groups in the United States is more troublesome than any other thing that we have looking inward in the United States. So the first thing that I am hopeful for, and here's, I think, the good news, and I've said this on a lot of different webinars. Again, right down the middle, I was completely prepared for Trump to win re-election. If President Trump would have been reelected, I simply thought this, and I think this is kind of a common thought as you look through this. President Trump now has another 4 years. He has to run for re-election, and I think he could have brought the temperature down in the nation. He's not out there campaigning. He can bring things down because he doesn't have those pressures. If now President-elect Biden was elected, which I think, we believe that's going to happen, he will take office. I don't think we're going to look back now. And I think obviously just yesterday, the indications from the Trump administration, I think we're going in that direction. The thought there was, you have a new president, you have fresh blood, you have a fresh optic, and that his primary job, if Biden does nothing else, and let's assume the Republicans hold the Senate, if he gets nothing done materially, but does one thing, Biden can lower the temperature. If he can lower the emotion of the country, he probably, and I think it's a fallacy to think, and I know he's trying. Obviously, his rhetoric has been, I want to unite the country. I want to support the Americans that didn't vote for me. These things are very, very deliberate, of course. I don't know that we can unite the country right now, not in the short term. I think the United States will get through this. I think we've always found a way. I think our government is so balanced that neither party can go too far to the right or left. The extremes, are never going to be there. That's the beauty of our system. But I do think that in the short term, you can't unite us right now. It would take another 9/11 to unite the country together. We're so divided and so tribal, and it's so emotional. And frankly, the reason that is because of this thing right here and the internet. We all can find and make ourselves feel good about anything we want to talk about or find, and find people that agree with us. And that's, that's become dangerous to a certain level. So ultimately, I am hopeful that Biden will come in. I hope that he will bring the temperature down. We will regain our trust in the FBI, in the CIA, in the DOD, in the State Department, all of those enterprises. And I think if we can readdress mental health issues and readdress at the local level our police, and I think we should openly have this conversation about retraining the police. I think there's good and bad in every organization. There's good police, there's bad police. There's good people at where you work, and there's bad people where I work, right? I mean, we all face this because it's the human condition. The human condition is always going to be just that. No matter what human beings you put in an organization, there will be good and bad. If we can address those issues and bring the temperature down, then I think we can find our way back to at least lower the rhetoric. And I think at this point, in the short term at least, that's the best we're going to do.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Dale. And so just another question, and this goes more along the lines of Global Guardian services. Early on in the pandemic, when we were, I attended a few of your webinars as well, and you guys were working on extracting people from countries that were closing down their borders. And you touched upon some of the terroristic threats in the EU and abroad, and some of the work that Global Guardian has done in terms of bringing people back to US soil safely. Can you just touch upon that a little bit? Because there's been some fascinating case studies from your group.
Yep. So I'll go back to the travel slide. I asked all of you kind of a rhetorical question of, when should you travel? When is it okay? And I asked this: if you know how to get out of a country, if you get sick, then go. If you know how to get out of a country when the borders get closed or the airspace gets closed, you know how you're going to get out, then you should go. If you can't answer those questions, then we fully advise that you should reconsider this travel. So this is what I would say. When COVID started, you saw, this started in Asia, and we started pushing people into Hong Kong and then getting them out. Then we started flying people to South Korea and then getting them out. Then we started having to fly people out of Morocco, all the way to Morocco, because all the borders and all the airspace was closed, and then we were getting them out. We had cases in Peru, Guatemala, all over Central South America, where we had to get people out of countries where the border was closed and the airspace was closed. In addition, we had to fly a lot of COVID sick patients. And here's where that comes from. On the COVID part, no insurance platform in the world supports pandemics. So if you have travel health insurance, COVID was not covered outside of paying for your hospital stay. They weren't going to fly you back to the US if you got sick under your normal travel platform. And we do. And that led to flying everywhere from 10 sick patients on one aircraft to one individual, doing this for the British government, doing it for the US State Department, doing it for others. On the travel part of this, simple example, we had a family of 6 get stuck in Guatemala City. And yes, the airspace was closed, so you couldn't fly out, and the borders were closed, therefore you couldn't drive out. And most of our competitors, frankly, just went, nope, can't help you. Here's the reality of all those situations. If you go to the host nation government and you have teams on the ground in that country, in this case in Guatemala City with the 6 family members, we simply had an ex-Ministry of Interior executive go to the president's office, the Guatemalan presidential office, and ask for an exception to policy, and we got it. And we got an exception to policy for the family of 6 to legally cross the border into Mexico by vehicle, and then we had a jet waiting for him and flew him to Texas. In the case of Honduras, and you can go to our website and see this, we flew 9 aircraft, everything from 150 plus American citizens down to private jets to get families out when, again, the airspace was closed, the borders were closed. And all we did was negotiate directly to the 4-star general that runs the military for Honduras and the president. So when you see these reports from the State Department that say the borders closed, the airspace is closed, you can't get in or out, that's not always the case. You can operate outside of the parameters of the US State Department. There's nothing that legally says that we are limited to what the State Department says. Now, we will always tell the State Department what we're doing. We will always give them the manifest and say, we're taking 144 Americans out this afternoon. But there's no requirement to do that. And there's nothing that says, I can't get you out of that situation just because the State Department says it's locked down. So I think those are kinds of the key lessons learned in all of this. And medical flights, I can always get you out because of medical necessity. Even if you're COVID sick or any kind of illness or injury, I can always get you into a foreign country outside of Iran, North Korea, typically without issue.
Thank you, Dale. Yeah, fascinating, fascinating work. So that concludes the questions that we've received from the audience. And I know Zach has a question, so I'm just going to kick it over to him before we close out our event.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. Dale, this has been awesome. Another loaded question for you. There are a lot of eyes on these Senate races down in Georgia. And so I'm curious how, Global Guardian thinks about sort of the ripple effects depending on where those go. And I think about, I think the police as policy is sort of a good example of how the country thinks about these particular Senate races and what it means going forward, because you have part of the country who's concerned that if those races turn blue, something like that as policy could actually happen. And and then at the other side, theoretical gridlock and nothing getting accomplished. And I think ironically, somebody's texting me about this right now who's listening in. There are grassroots efforts on sort of both quote unquote sides that agree fundamentally with what the solution is, and it's what you've covered today, specifically on retraining the police, and helping them around mental health issues and all the things we've talked about. So there's a core here in this country that gets it and understands the sort of logical path forward on a lot of these policy issues. But for better and worse, we have to rely on government and government policy to actually execute that. So just thinking about how Global Guardian thinks about these specific Senate races and sort of what that means over the next, several years from a policy perspective.
Yep. So Jake, or Zach, I'm sorry. Look, these are super loaded questions. No matter how I answer it, somebody in the audience will disagree, and that's just the way of the world now. So I don't even try and play to satisfy one side or the other. I think at the macro level, I would answer it this way, and you've heard this theme from me now for the last hour. To your point, Zach, I think that a majority of Americans get it. I don't think the right nor the left on the extreme end of either side is the majority of this country. I don't. I think Americans, just like the rest of the world, as human beings, again, the human condition, we want security, we want our kids to be able to grow up, we want our future, our future as a nation, and our kids to have opportunity. I think that's uniform in the human condition, and I think that will always be the majority. So as you look at the defund the police movement, I don't think Biden is coming in, and I don't think he's going to entertain that. He's openly said it. Do I think there's some extreme parts of the Democratic Party that would love to do some of that? Yes. Do I think they're the majority? No. And do I think that our system protects from extremism on both sides? I don't think that if Bernie Sanders was elected president, that the United States is going to turn into a socialist country, because the system won't allow it. It just won't. That's why we have 3 co-equal branches of government. And the pendulum in this country swings back and forth, but we always end up somewhere in here because that's the beauty of our Constitution. It's what the founders were so focused on, laser focused, and thank God for their genius. And I just think that's why the United States will always endure. And yes, we have extreme rights and extreme lefts, but I don't think defund the police is real. I don't think it'll take hold, nor do I think that Black Lives Matter becomes mainstream. I don't think they get their way either. And I certainly don't think that the extreme, the white supremacist groups and the right fringe groups, I don't think they get their way either. That's a law enforcement issue. It'll get taken care of at a local level. Maybe every once in a while the FBI gets involved because it's a national level case. But ultimately, I think the beauty of America will always remain that you can't be too far right, you can't be too far left, and the system forces us to always come to what I believe is fact-based, commonsensical responses. And yes, there's always going to be something on the internet, and yes, there's always going to be now cable channels that will feed red meat to whatever opinion or side they're going after, just purely based on ratings. But ultimately, the country, the nation, I think because of the human condition and the understanding of that, plus our system won't allow extreme views like defund the police to become a reality. I don't buy it. And I certainly don't think, with Biden coming in, I don't think he buys it either. And, again, there'll be some people that use that to get sound bites, and I think you'll see some pockets, but I don't think either side wins on the extreme views. And I think that's why we still remain a great nation, why we will find our way out of this. Because make no mistake, there could be another 9/11 tomorrow. There can be another Pearl Harbor tomorrow. There can be a natural disaster in the middle of this country. And as soon as that happens, all this rhetoric turns towards the crisis and we find neutral again. It's the way we united in 9/11, and you saw the country unite. You saw people kind of put these things aside. I think that's the way we're designed, and that's why I'm always hopeful. And look, I've lived all the world. I would not want to live in any other country in the world. And that sounds terrible to some, I'm sure. But I just statistically alone, there's more opportunity and more hope in this country than any other country in the world. So the stressors that we find on a daily basis, just know we still live in the greatest country in the world. It just is what it is. There's no denying it.
Thank you, Dale.
Thanks for the insight today, Dale. Great session. Appreciate it.